Well, hello everybody. First of all, Madeline, thank you for the introduction. As Madeline said, I am Wilfred de Vries. I'm a clinical physicist engineer from the University Medical Center in Utrecht, and my main focus in work is on MRI and MR-linac. And from there on, I do have an experience with the Delta4 Phantom Plus MR. Together with Scandidos, we did here in Utrecht, we did the development and afterwards the acceptance, and we have some first clinical results which I would like to present to you today. Some disclosures. So part of this research and presented work in this session is supported by Scandidos and by Elekta and or Philips. First of all, I will give you a brief overview of the MR-linac system and the challenges which there are for QA in an MR-linac. And this has, of course, already been presented a couple of times, so therefore I only put it in brief context. The Unity MR-linac system we are using in Utrecht, it's a 1.5 Tesla MRI from Philips, and around there is adapted a linear accelerator which produces a 7 MV photon beam. It's a standing waveguide and all has a cylindrical geometry. The bore of the MRI is 70 centimeters, so it's a wide bore, and the radiation is perpendicular to the magnetic field. As you can see on the right, there is a schematic overview of it, so you can see that the gantry is mounted around the MRI and rotating 360 degrees of freedom around it. Then about the challenges for QA in a 1.5 magnetic field. As you can see in the right bottom, my professor Bas Rijmakers has already in 2008 made a publication about it. First of all, we have the MR-linac over here, and if you put in schematics the photon beam, as said, it's perpendicular to the magnetic field, and therefore by Lorentz force law, the force of the electrons is bent towards the right, which is depicted over here. And this ends up in a kernel which is bended to the right as well. Over here you can see that for a 6 MV photon beam with a 0 Tesla field, it's going all down. But if you put a 1.5 Tesla magnetic field to the same kernel, it's bended off to the right. And thanks to Bas Rijmakers, he has depicted it in some pictures over here as well in the bottom, where you can see schematically the photons coming from above, and then the photons do get some interactions where the electrons are freed. If there is no magnetic field, the electrons will go more or less straight forward together with photon beam. If a 1.5 Tesla magnetic field is applied to that same photon beam, you will see an effect that we call the electron return effect, where the electrons are actually bent back towards the medium where they come from. So at the exit dose, that gives a significantly increased dose at the bottom of a medium. If we then look to the inline and crossline profiles, and due to the shift to the right, you can see already that the crossline profile here in purple is bended towards the right, so your symmetry is off. And in the most right picture, you can see that even your PDDs show a electron return effect. If you do QA on a patient plan, you have to take this all into account, because it's not that straightforward from a linear accelerator. If that was the only thing, it would be overcomable, but there are more challenges, and all of of them are already published in scientific papers. For instance, if you use ion chambers or diodes, or what kind of detectors you want to use, you have to apply corrections to it due to the magnetic field, but also take into account that air gaps around your detector might increase your reading of dose by almost 3 to 5% if there is 1 millimeter of air around your ion chamber or diode. Also, due to the bending to the right, there is an angular sensitivity, which is already described by Howling et al. In 2016. And for the Delta4 in 2018, I published myself an article about it. And you can end up with deviations up to 11%. And then there is the point that the table is a static table with respect to the MRI. So if you do have a treatment which you have to do with off-axis fields, it's the question: do I place my fields at an isocentric detector, or do I place my detector off-center? And this is all something you have to think about before you go into QA of treatment plans in an MR-Linac. And then a little bit about the development of the new Phantom. I'll give you an historical overview. In 2009 to 2012, we started up with a prototype of the MR-Linac, as you can see on the right. And then the question came up with, can we deliver a plan to it? A colleague of mine, Jochem Wolthaus, he created a TPS dose, and on film we irradiated that same plan. And as you can see in the lower right, it's in percentage given what the local dose difference is, and in the high dose region you can see that it is up to 4%. This is of course only 2D plane and it's film dosimetry, but it was feasible that we could give a treatment plan. I have to say, no patients were treated on this machine since it was only a prototype, so it was more like a feasibility study. Then in 2016, the first MR compatible QA device came on the market, and my colleague Annette Houweling has put quite some effort in it, looking at, can we measure the dose from a plan according to the TPS dose. And as you can see, it's quite the same. So this was with average gamma pass rates of 98.4%, was quite good, and therefore we thought, okay, if we can get this kind of agreements between our TPS dose and our measured dose, maybe we can look forward to new QA devices. Also over here, no patients were treated with these plans. Then in 2016, I contacted Scandidos about the question if it is possible to make an MR compatible Delta4. At that time, there was only the old PT, as you can see on the pictures over here. James Bedford in 2009 already wrote a scientific paper about the evaluation of the Delta4 Phantom. So from there on, I knew what for instance, dose linearity would do, what the field size dependency would do. So the question first was, can we make an MR compatible Delta4 Phantom, and will it be as good as that James Bedford wrote in his article? To do this, we checked all the for magnetic components, and as you can see in the right picture, for instance, the feet underneath the Phantoms are gone, because those turned out to be magnetic. So Scandidos had to make a new part of it. Also, the backside of the Phantom is gone, since network ports were shielded ports, and it turned out to be that if you put them in a magnetic field, there was no signal coming at all from the Phantom. So we had to change over the Ethernet ports with unshielded ones, and then we could do the measurements. Also at that time, no patients were treated. At that time, I put a lot of effort in characterization of that prototype MR compatible Delta4, and as you can see, it's still the old Delta4 PT, but this was more a study where we showed, okay, the Phantom, or at least the main board, behaves well in a magnetic field, and it turned out to be that the results we've shown in my article were pretty close to ones that James Bedford already showed in 2009. So from here on, we could go on to creating a new Delta4 Plus. So in 2018, then Scandidos came up with a prototype Delta4 Plus MR, and as you can see, it's a lot of cabling around. Because we've already in the previous slide, I've shown that the main board itself, it will work in a magnetic field, but we were not sure about all the electronics, and therefore we made extension cables to it. And as you can see in the middle of the picture, there is the part which the electronics are put into and where all the cables go to. In 2018, we started doing patient treatment, but since there was still a prototype of the Delta4, we were trustworthy to put our patient QA on it. So that's why we started off with 2D films. And then in nowadays, 2019, there is a MR compatible Delta4 called Delta4 Plus MR. It's already CE labeled and FDA approved, and as I will show you in the next slides, we did acceptance testing on it as well as on a Unity machine as on a Versa HD machine, and it both turned out to be working very well. And nowadays we do our patient QA on the Delta4 Plus MR, and in later slides I will show you the first clinical results about it. So acceptance testing of the new Delta4 Plus MR. We did a lot of tests, and it was more like the same test that James Bedford already produced in 2009, which is short-term reproducibility, and it turned out that the short-term reproducibility was less than 0.1% over 10 measurements. Then we did dose linearity, which turned out to be less than 2% for 2 mu, which is from our point of view pretty good. And when you apply 5 mu to it, it's even less than 0.5% difference. And dose linearity is less than 0.5%. When you apply 10% of your nominal dose rate to it, it's the dose per pulse dependency is less than 0.6%. The field size dependency is of course with the smallest field size the largest, so it's still within 2% if you apply a 2 centimeter squared field to it. And the angular dependency, that's within the software done, and it's per device type corrected for, since you can imagine that it doesn't matter if you put the Delta4 Plus MR either on a normal Linac or a MRI-Linac. I've both tested them, and the angular dependency is for all angles less than 1%. So also the angular dependency is implemented in the software is good. A few graphs, I won't show them all to you, but for instance the short-term reproducibility, you can see over here that we've tested them for all the different energies we have, 6, 10 MV, 6 MV flattening filter free, as well as on the Unity machine, which are the purple crosses. And for instance, dose linearity, here you can see that if you apply 2 mu to the system, you get up to deviations up to 2%, which is very good if you ask us for such a device. The X scale is in a log, so if you see these pictures, it's counting on a log scale. So therefore we applied up to 3000 mu, and it's still within the good range. Then the first clinical results for the new Delta4. We now have the Delta4 Plus MR for almost 6 weeks. I can show you the first clinical results of it. On the Unity machine, we started off by treating rectal patients. So at this time, I got a number of 5 rectal patient plans, which are now measured on the Delta4. And as you can see from the numbers on, the dose deviation is 96%, which is good. But if you look, for instance, to the gamma, you have a gamma pass rate of 99.4%, which is terrific, if you ask me. And this is all done with the 3% 3mm. We will look into the data, what will happen if it is 2% 2mm, for instance. Then of course your gamma pass rate will be a little bit lower, but we still think that if you go for 2% 2mm, it is well beyond 95%, which is for us the cutoff to say, okay, this is a good or a bad plan. So in conclusion then, the Delta4 Plus MR is now available on the market. You can go to delta4family.com, and there you can order a Delta4 Phantom Plus MR. We completed all the acceptance tests and we all approved them. So clinical use has now started recently, where the first clinical results look promising to us. As I said, we have a Unity machine, which is a 1.5 Tesla MR-Linac, but Tino Rocamero at AAPM showed in his work that it's well working within a 0.35 Tesla MR-linac machine. So from that conclusion on, we can conclude that a Delta4 Plus MR is the patient treatment QA Phantom for all MRI-Linacs on the nowadays market, and it's certified up to 1.5 Tesla. So you can actually use it in all MRI-Linacs that are there. So in the end, I have to thank people from Scandidos, saying Daniel, Mikael, Thomas, Madeleine, of course, which is our chair at this webinar. It's Anders, it's Ingmar, it's Jurgen, and Patrick is our sales representative in the Netherlands from Scandidos. And then, of course, I have my colleagues from UMC Utrecht, which contributed as well to this research work. I will end up with a saying from Henry Ford, where he said that coming together is a beginning and keeping together is the progress, where working together is a success. And I think that these 3 phrases are do express very well how the cooperation between Scandidos and Utrecht is. So we hope to look forward to keep the cooperation with Scandidos. That was actually the webinar that I had to give you, and I now hand over to Madeleine again for some questions, and hopefully I can give you then the answers. Thank you very much.
I have a question from Bin Yang, who's asking how to set up the Phantom.
How to set up the Phantom? That's actually a good question. Thank you for that, Jan. In Utrecht, we applied external lasers to the MRI-Linac. So therefore, we can, I would say, almost use this same setup of the Phantom as we would do a regular Linac. Despite that, the lateral movement of the table is not possible. So at this moment, we do only or have only measured QA plants which are in a centered position. Um, Together with some technical guys at Utrecht, we are now looking into if we can apply some kind of sliding ruler to the feet of the Phantom, so that we can place the Delta4 Phantom off center. That's still work in progress. It's not there, but together with the guys from Scandidos, we are looking after such a solution. But like I said, in Utrecht we do have external lasers. I'm aware of that. Elekta only provides a sagittal laser, so that does mean that if you don't have external lasers in your MR-Linac room, you can only center it on the table, and with the accurate table positioning device of the MR-Linac, you should be able to put it into isocenter. Hopefully that does answer your question.
Okay, I have another question here from, let's see, I'm sorry, from Thierry, whose last name I actually can't see, who's asking, did you use Monaco as your treatment planning system also for your regular Linux? Can another treatment planning system be used in parallel?
The answer to that question is yes, we use Monaco as well as on the Unity machine as for the regular Linux. Usability of another planning system for just the, let's say, standard Linux, so with no magnetic field, I would say yes, because there is actually no difference between planning for a normal Phantom on a let's say normal Linac with no magnetic field, and with the Delta4 Plus MR. If you want to plan it on an MR-Linac, I only have experience with Unity, and therefore I can say in Monaco it's going exactly the same. The only thing is that you have to apply your beam data of your Unity machine to it, but it doesn't take into account the magnetic field then. So yeah, I would say it's just as plan it in a normal TPS.
Okay, thank you, Wilfred.
Well, thank you all for your attendance and listening to this webinar.